The New York Times Magazine described Mayor Pete Buttigieg's campaign as a liberal arts variety show, seemingly scientifically designed to appeal to a specific demographic of upper-middle-class dads. He quotes Joyce. He can order a sandwich in 8 languages, including Norwegian, a language that no one has any business speaking. He drinks good Scotch. His husband is named Chaston and dabbles in improv comedy. He played a duet with Ben fucking Folds. This is the candidate that Ben, who went to Wesleyan and has 2 kids, but is a total cool dad, wants to get a craft beer with. The brand is strong, which means that the Brooklyn-based design firm Hyperakt had its work cut out for it when designing the visual look and feel of this campaign. Here to talk about graphic standards, kerning and leading, and the first ever democratized campaign toolkit is Deroy Peraza, co-founder of Hyperakt.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
So how did this all come to pass? Did the campaign reach out to you?
Yeah, we got a random phone call in the middle of February asking us if we'd be interested in branding Pete Buttigieg's campaign, and we were very interested. It's something that we had been wanting to do since last year.
Specifically for Mayor Pete? Or
just really help a Democratic candidate get elected and get beyond the current situation that we find ourselves in.
And had you done political branding work before?
We had done a little bit of political branding for a candidate who didn't end up running.
I see. That must be disappointing.
You know, it's disappointing, but it's something that you sort of start the project knowing and having to be prepared for.
Right.
And, of course, you want your work always to see the light of day, but...
So in February, when Buttigieg's campaign reached out to you, what did you know about him as a candidate?
Honestly, very little. I was aware that he was a candidate because we were doing our research. But other than that he was a young mayor from South Bend, I honestly knew very little about him.
What was the internal process for you guys like? Like, did you get together and say, all right, there are certain types of candidates we absolutely will do this work for, and then there are others that we wouldn't? Like, were there any ideological lines that you wouldn't cross?
Yeah, I mean, we have a lot of discussions about ideological lines in the studio about all kinds of different projects, not just political ones. In this case, we felt like the sort of bigger picture here was to help a Democrat get elected.
You got a pretty lucky draw. Even though he was an unknown, his personal brand is very strong, as we talked about. So talk to me a little bit about the design research process that you went through in order to arrive at this graphic branding.
So the first step is we go out and visit our client and we get to know them, and we design workshops to really try to extract as much information as possible and to get them to collaborate in the process. We get them to draw. We get them to, answer all kinds of tough questions about their background. And we got a very warm welcome. They got a very warm welcome while they were there. And that meant that they got to take a lot of pictures and they got to hear a lot of firsthand stories and anecdotes. And I really experienced them in person.
That really comes through in the branding to me. I mean, certainly in the colorways that you released. There's like a particular type of blue that references a color that was used by Studebaker, which is based in South Bend. There's also like
Strato blue.
There you go. Yeah. There's also a cream color. Tell me a little bit about that one.
Clay's cream. Yeah. So all of the colors are rooted in either something that's very much a part of South Bend's history, or that is very personal to Pete. Clay's is inspired by Clay's old-fashioned hard candy, which is a over 100-year-old candy company in South Bend. It's a mom and pop shop. It's been just making awesome candy since the beginning of the last century, and it's still there. And the cream color is the color of the packaging of that candy.
I want to come back to the typography, but there's such a cool tool on the branding website where you've done sort of like a photo mood board of South Bend and Mayor Pete and things that are important to him, and maybe describe the tool that you built over that.
Sure. So the tool actually was, when we started the project, we didn't really start by saying, hey, we should make this tool that's going to be publicly available. About 2 weeks before launch, as the tool was shaping up, we presented the idea to them that maybe we should just make this public so that everybody can use this, because really, I mean, a presidential campaign is like a giant 1.5-year-long pep rally. And in order to really get people excited, we need to help them.
And this tool is sort of this photo mood board, and there's a vertical slider, and you can move it back and forth, and it on one side is the photos, and then you move the slider over it, and it reduces it to the main colors.
So that's on the color page.
Yes.
The tool has several different areas. It has a logos page where you can download all of the different variations of the logo that we've created for the campaign in multiple different color combinations. It has a page that has the color story and explains where the color came from, which is rooted in that mood board. It has a page on typography to explain why we chose the typefaces that we chose, a page for place-based supporter signs so that we can imbue some local pride in the campaign and get people to really support it that way.
Talk about the typography, because
Yeah.
you have these individual, more than 50, because you also include not just states, but also overseas territories.
Right.
You have these individual signs that people can
Yeah.
print out and put in their yard. And each state or territory is hand-lettered
Yeah.
in a font that's very evocative of the place. Talk to me about the decision to do that. And, I mean, it's an incredible amount of work that you did.
It was a way of really adding more texture to the brand and making it feel less like precious and perfect, and like really we didn't want to create a brand that felt like super corporate and limited. One of the signals that we wanted to send with this, besides that local pride is really important, is that this brand is really, it can go in a lot of different directions, and the intention with this tool isn't to create hard and fast rules that people have to follow because there's a brand guide. It's not really so much a brand guide as it is a starter toolkit. We want people to download these assets, modify them, take them, use them as a starting point if they want to, and really show us what they do with them. It's meant to be sort of a seed.
I think many campaigns and candidates would be very scared by what you just said. The idea
Probably.
that you can modify this to say whatever you want and that it's still attached to a candidate, I think would turn a lot of candidates off. So talk to me about the thinking through of that. Like, what if people are downloading this toolkit and, you know, printing negative or hateful campaign slogans?
Yeah, I mean, fortunately, we're working with a campaign that's really interested in doing things differently and is courageous and is also of a generation that's much more familiar with the way the web works. And the reality is, if people want to do hateful, negative things with campaign imagery, you can do that even without the toolkit.
Right, they'll do it anyway.
Right? They're going to do it anyway. I mean, we are focusing on the positive. We feel like by putting it out there, we're making people who maybe aren't designers, but who still want to support with pride, we're trying to make their lives easier. Just in the first week alone, graphic assets were downloaded 45,000 times, if I remember correctly. So a lot of people have their hands on these things now, and there has been all kinds of stuff on Twitter and Instagram, people showing how they've used them to make signs for their yard, or they've added mountains to the Colorado sign. People are really actually trying to add to the tool set that we created, and that's been super exciting. People are making murals. Somebody painted their garage door with the South Bend lettering and the Pete logo. So that's the kind of stuff that, is just, it's magic. And people just make it their own.
You've written about campaign branding. I believe this was for
Fast Company.
For Fast Company, right. And you talked about, in particular, the influx of female candidates, about how they're sort of changing color schemes. Talk to me a little bit about who else has branding that you really admire.
Well, I mean, I think the big takeaway, so I wrote that piece in the beginning of February, and all the candidates hadn't entered the race yet. But of the ones who had, it was clear that the women candidates were taking more risks in terms of color palettes. Now, I want to just put this in context. Presidential branding typically is not the most adventurous space for branding. So just not choosing red, white, and blue is sort of a big deal in presidential politics. Mm-hmm. And I thought that was noteworthy and indicative of the fact that we're in an election cycle that's pretty different from any previous election cycle. And it's the most diverse field out there. It's the fields with the most women. Weirdly, though, the most of the male candidates had stuck to red, white, and blue. I appreciate the courage that it took for Kamala to go with yellow and purple and this sort of like not really red, and even Elizabeth Warren with the sort of dark purple blue and that mint green color that nobody would have ever associated with American politics
mint.
ever before.
Yeah.
I mean, I think they're appropriate for them.
Final question. This is a little bit larger scale. When you think about the 1920s, you think about deco design. There are certain decades, right, that have a very strong graphic look and feel. I'm also thinking about the 60s, those sort of like groovy, hippie fonts and whatnot. How would you describe our current design moment?
I think that's hard because, in the 1920s and the 60s, there was no internet and there was no just the speed at which trends evolved was much slower. I think it's hard in the moment to say like the trend that's happening right now is this.
Well, this design toolkit is so cool, and regardless of what candidate people are backing, I encourage them to go check it out and play around with it. Give us the website.
The website is design.peteforamerica.com.
Cool. Deroy, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.